Hello there racing fans and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all in top form. I've got a few tips tonight for Newcastle, which Friday night under the lights at Newcastle, what could be better? None of this Newmarket action, which we will have some tips for on the big day on Saturday. I'm very excited to see one horse in the middle park. That is definitely going to be worth a watch, and there'll be a video coming out on Friday night most likely about that. But for Newcastle we do have a few tips. Before we jump into that, my previous video on the channel is definitely worth a watch in my view. Of course I would say that, but I do think it was quite a nice interview with Dylan Cooner, who's definitely lived some more exciting lives than me certainly, and probably a lot of those listening today. He started out in South Africa, became a trainer, ultramarathon runner, airline pilot, moved to the UK, started training horses in Newmarket. He's got a lot of stories to tell and a horse that he thinks is going to turn up to be a group horse in time, so it's definitely worth a quick watch if you've got time for. But apart from that, we'll get on with today's video, and my first tip at Newcastle in the first race, hoping to get off to the perfect start, and it would be the perfect start if this one wins. Boys and Bell, she's a 22-1 shot and was quite an early built filly. She was a 2-year-old for David O'Mara, has since moved stables, but won on debut at Beverley. Actually back to that day, maybe I've just got a soft spot for her since then, but she kind of was a pretty decent 2-year-old, to be honest. Ran in some decent races, was rated in the mid-70s, ran in the Weatherby's Super Sprint, if you remember, behind Happy Romance, who won that pretty nicely, and has won twice on the all-weather, albeit not at Newcastle, but she's shown that she acts on the all-weather. That's certainly a plus. She's down to a career low mark of 50 today. The last time she won was off a mark of 51, so she's below a last winning mark as well. Operating below that is always a good thing for these horses, and she hasn't been running too badly. The last couple of races was beaten a couple of lengths at Catterick on good to firm ground, and she kind of was slowly away that day, which at Catterick puts you on the back foot, which never suits. Ran very well for a long way at Beverley. That was a decent enough race, and the winner has ran well since as well, and the fourth has also ran okay since as well, so the form of that has worked out okay. She finished 5th that day. She was kind of up with the pace, but just kind of faded close home up the hill. Similar thing could happen again today, but she's got plenty of pace, and if she channels her energy in the right direction, she'll definitely be running a decent race. She's 22-1, but the thing is, she can kind of play up at the start, so it's probably, if you're going to back her, kind of wait to see how she goes down to the start. If she's in the right mood, she can run a huge race at 20-1. She's probably the best handicapped horse on her old form, from a mark of 70s down to the 50s. Harry Russell, I'm a big fan of him as well. So at 22-1, it's a stab in the dark, but it could easily come off. It could easily not work as well. Of course, play at your own risk. We'll be waiting a few races for the next bet, which comes in the 7:15, and it's going to be the 3-horse Bacardi, Les Ayres, Lewis Edmonds. To be fair, Les Ayres has had quite a quiet spell, to be honest. Hasn't been banging in the winners like he did probably 2 seasons ago, where he's had an unbelievable strike rate and everything turned to goals. But I think this horse is well handicapped. This horse ran 2nd at Newcastle this time last year off a mark of 60, and was just beaten in a photo finish by a nose by Alaskan Wind. Asheen Murphy took the ride that day, and based on that form you thought this horse would be winning multiple times since then. Has actually kind of fallen out of favour since then, has been out of form. Came back this year, ran a decent race at Catterick and Weatherby. Kind of is a proper galloping horse, likes the flat straight tracks with a stiff finish. Newcastle ticks all of them boxes. You can tell best run of the season came at Weatherby, where that has like a 4 furlong running, and you can really wind this horse up because it'll gallop on strongly over the 7 furlongs, probably gets a mile as well if it really wanted to, and wasn't very good at all on the last start, to be honest. I think that reflects the price. It was well beaten at the end of the day. Probably went off a little bit too fast, but it's been given a little bit of a break since then. Been dropped £2, back on the all-weather. I think all of these factors will suit. And it's supposedly the second string. Hillary's Boy, also trained by Les Ayres, is the 5-1 favourite. I'm not sure if he's Les Ayres trying to kind of maybe put the market one way when it shouldn't be. He's done the old second string hat on Bacardi. I'm not sure this is the second string. I can see this coming in for a little bit of support, definitely more than Hillary's boy at 5-1. There won't be a 7-point difference in them between the off. So Bacardi, Lewis Edmonds, Lazaire 12-1. They're trying to pull the wool over our eyes, I do think, at 12-1 with a supposedly second string. I'll be taking a punt at 12-1. I might be proved wrong, and I probably will be, but for me, Bacardi at 12-1 does interest me slightly. Final tip of the day comes in the 8:15, the last race on the card, and it's going to be Bond Power. Paul Mulrennan takes the ride, and I think this horse is another one who's kind of fell out of favour, but I just can see a resurgence. It's like with my two other tips, they've kind of been teetering, not fully performing, but I just know there's a big performance. Whether they're going to come today, that's another question. But this horse has only run at Newcastle once, and it was in the Racing League in the back end of August, just a couple of weeks ago, and I finished 6th in a race where horses were rated as big as 90. That was a Class 3, and it was drawn in stall 2, which is never a good thing at Newcastle. I kind of had to overcome a pace bias that day, and also drawn on the wrong side of the track. They're all reasons why he probably didn't perform as well as he could have done, even though he ran huge, to be honest. Cam Hardy took the ride, gave him a decent ride, did what he could. Paul Mulrennan, again, he's drawn in stall 2, isn't ideal, but I'm hoping this horse will be held up. Paul can work his way across. He does give a hold-up horse a very good ride, and ran pretty decently at Redcar when finishing 5th. Was sent off 7-2 that day, probably expected to do a little bit better, but the winner has finished 2nd since, and a few other horses have run okay. Goes with the same mark, back on the all-weather, drops to 6 furlongs as well, which I think suit the latest start in Newcastle. It got a little bit tired later, and Paul Mulrennan should be coming fast and late on this 10-1 shot, and hopefully picking up a place or maybe even a win. And that's going to round up the video. So 30 tips for me. Boys and Bell 22-1 in the 20-5. Bacardi in the 7:15 at 12-1. I think he'll go for a little bit shorter than that. And finally, in the lucky last, Bond Power 10-1 Paul Mulrennan. Can he do the business? I'm certainly hoping so. Hopefully we can be in the winner's enclosure with one of these 30 tips. And that's all from me. Over and out, and I'll see you on Friday for some tips and certainly a winner or two from Newmarket. See you soon.